Okay, so we've been talking about all of the associate core stuff here and some of the pieces that can kind of help you prepare for those tests and bringing all of that into the pro exam world. So as we begin thinking about new stuff that you might see on the pro one, a couple of big ones kind of come to mind for me. Hey friends, Bart here. I recently had the chance to sit down and take the AWS Solutions Architect Pro exam, the SAP-C01, which is still the first edition of the Solutions Architect Pro exam. This was actually my recertification, so this is the second time I've taken it over my career. And of course, as an AWS instructor, I'm going in, of course, to try to get certified, but I'm also very interested in trying to understand the delta. What's happened since the first time I took that exam and what the new exam looks like. Keeping in mind that since that time, countless services have come out from AWS, augmentations to existing classics that have come out there, and also trying to understand some of the delta in the way that they might change the actual questioning narrative itself, how they present the answers, how they present the questions, and the sort of information that you're supposed to glean from them. So kind of digging right into it here, the name of the game, friends, we're talking solutions architecting, so it's all about best practices. If you haven't put the well-architected framework on your list yet, you've got to do it. If you've watched anything from me over the years, you've got to know that I'm all about that well-architected framework. It's one of the greatest ways, one of the best offerings that AWS has created around condensing and kind of just epitomizing the best practices that are out there. And as a solutions architect, this is invaluable information. It's not just about regurgitating what the services do or what their names are or how they contrast against other services. It's about being able to evaluate cost, efficiency, security, ease of operation, and also really understanding what it means to meet a requirement. On the exam, they're going to ask you tons of questions where they'll give you answers that absolutely all solve the problem. A, B, C, and D, they all solve the problem. But they're looking for a specific aspect of it that you're supposed to identify. The most secure, the most cost efficient, the most performant. And even that alone, most performant, that implies an understanding of different types of performance. Are we talking about throughput? Are we talking about ability to consume large amounts of data? Are you talking about being able to perform data analytics on the fly? So stick with me. Over the next couple of minutes, we're going to be talking about some of the core things, how the associate nucleus grows and gets extended into these other pro topics, and how they start combining a lot of it, really expecting you to be able to pull together multiple services within a solution, and of course, keeping in mind that time management piece. So kind of starting right out, what I try to get people to think about is when you look at the associate exams, this is the solutions architect, SysOps, and developer associate exams, there's kind of a nucleic group of services that you have to know. And that would be, let me see if I can rattle them all off here. That would be, first of all, thinking about security. So identity and access management, CloudTrail, and keeping in mind some of the log visibility that you can get through CloudWatch as well. Lots of focus around maintaining visibility over security events. Keep in mind, guard duty helps us with some of that as well. Beyond that, of course, the compute and networking options that we can deal with, EC2, virtual private cloud, the supporting services that go along with that, like Elastic File Service, RDS lives in the VPCs as well, and the Elastic Block Storage volumes. Lots of content around that. You're going to continue to see those themes and those services throughout the pro exam. On top of that, thinking storage, knowing how DynamoDB is different from RDS, knowing those RDS availability and performance scenarios, and how all that works together with EBS volumes. All of these are critical things you're going to find in the associate exams. They stay on stage and they're still a big part of the pro cert. So that means that if you're going for the pro exam, you need to get really good at these core nucleic associate parts of it. Beyond that, S3. S3 is all across the place, knowing how to performance tune it, knowing how to manage the life cycles, and of course, understanding some of the cost optimizations that go along with it. The tiering for storages, bucket policies versus access control lists, the syntax that goes along with those, and of course, how to provide monitoring and security for those systems on top of it. So kind of moving through the nucleic part of it there, they're going to expect you to know all those pieces. But on the pro exam, they're adding a variety of new services on top of this. So this means that where we might talk about the queuing and notification service some in the associate exams, we really need to know some of the minutia of how they can make a difference in a solution, because they're going to be looking for things that reduce administrative effort, save us money, and improve the general managed offering that AWS is kind of trying to put out there for us. Remember, as solutions architect, the whole point is trying to identify what the right requirement is given the scenario. And that means that often it may not just be security, it may not just be cost, it might be both of those aspects, or it could be one of the other dynamics you heard me talking about earlier. So as you think about the core nucleic services themselves, always remember, friends, the frequently asked questions are going to be one of the very best ways to kind of help prepare for this. So let me do a little markup here just to kind of keep us on track. So you're talking about the associate core parts, okay, the services that you heard me talking about right there. Best ways to kind of stay on point there is always remember that you're talking about the frequently asked questions. Double check that stuff. Use them as a good metric to help you understand what you should know about those services and the cost and security factors that might affect them along the way. You heard me talk about the well-architected framework many times. Definitely need to keep that on your plate here as well. They're going to expect you to bring all of that to the table from the associate world. Keeping in mind, too, that there are other white papers that are out there. I'm going to put WP for white papers on here, but that means your cloud best practices, which they have on there. They also have the security white papers. There is a data white paper that's out there as well. Okay, and quite a few other ones. Another one about compute and networking. All of those are going to be key pieces that they're expecting you to draw on. And hey, you know what the cool thing is, friends? Remember, that stuff is freely provided by AWS right now. So that means you can go out on aws.training, look at their material. You can also get into the AWS documentation and also make sure you check out the AWS Architecture Center. Great resources there. And I mean, they're just basically providing all of this right there so you know what you need to get into, what level you need to study at, and how to prepare yourself for the exam. Okay, so we've been talking about all of the associate core stuff here and some of the pieces that can kind of help you prepare for those tests and bringing all of that into the pro exam world. So as we begin thinking about new stuff that you might see on the pro one, a couple of big ones kind of come to mind for me. Okay, account patterns, very important here. Understanding how multi-account helps us with isolation and some of the problems that it creates with regard to using roles back and forth, the idea of creating and administering permissions across accounts, the idea of using shared services accounts or shared services models. Remember, friends, when we talk about shared services, that's the idea of creating one account to maybe put your identity pieces in, or maybe put your logging pieces in, or maybe put some of the security and review and access components in there, and then controlling the ability for other teams to use some of those resources. So if you're unfamiliar with multi-account patterns, definitely a big part of this. Remember, they're not talking about new services here. We're still talking about identity and access management and AWS organizations, but the patterns that they're using and how they interoperate with each other, that definitely takes it to the pro level. Beyond that, a couple of other ones. A lot of data analytics on this particular one. There was a lot of questions around how to process and review data at certain levels. So whether you're talking about running SQL queries, whether you're thinking about stream analysis, or maybe using something like S3 Select. Again, some of those are new services, but a lot of them are just existing patterns that are out there. Now, S3 Select is a little different facet of S3 that you might want to know about. And Kinesis is one that they don't focus on a whole lot on the associate exams. So a little bit of new effort there. And of course, keeping in mind that one of the big analytics tools within AWS is Elastic MapReduce and Redshift. We don't see them in the associate exams as much. So knowing how they contrast and compare with one another, very important patterns. Remember, friends, the biggest thing I can tell you here is that Elastic MapReduce is great for transformations. It's great for programmatic discovery. It's great for things like ETL. And remember too that AWS Glue also helps augment that by being able to do some of that in kind of a serverless managed fashion to help prepare your metadata information to be used in things like Elastic MapReduce or used in things like Athena. So really a lot of analytic options that are there. Remember, the shortcut with Redshift is that it's all about predictable types of data. If you know you're going to run reports regularly against a particular set of data and you can prepare the data for those reports, a data warehousing solution like Redshift is going to be a great value proposition. So we want to make sure we can differentiate between when to use Athena, when to use Glue or Elastic MapReduce, when to go and use something like Redshift. A lot of that has to do with the client that might be interacting with it or the reproducibility of the data. As things get more volatile, more real-time, get closer to Kinesis Analytics, closer to things like S3 Select, closer to things like Elastic MapReduce and Glue. As things become more predictable, more static, or larger predefined data sets, that's where Redshift is really going to shine. So if all of this is sounding a little crazy to you, Bart warned you. I'm trying to let you know, make sure you understand some of those analytics angles on it as well. Okay, so kind of continuing on, thinking about some of the other ones that we might see in here. a lot more focus on, there was a lot more focus on containers. Okay, so we needed to know on the associates how containers help us. But on the pro, we really need to understand how to pass tasks off to them, how some of the permission schemes work between them, how Elastic Container Service versus Fargate versus Lambda kind of contrast with one another. And of course, if you're out there and you're looking for more information on this, you can come check me out at CBT Nuggets. Me and Trevor have been making a lot of content there in the catalog that'll help you with your container pitch. Remember, friends, containers are all about efficiency. Now, Lambda gives us some great opportunities, but it's limited in the footprint. So there's limited memory spaces and limited storage options there. Okay, now some of that gets a little tricky when we think about some of the new EFS options that are available there. But traditionally, if you had larger, long-running jobs, you were going to steer towards ECS and Fargate because they had more raw compute or they had better support for storage file systems. Think about the long time limits that Lambda might not be able to meet, okay? Some of those are going to steer better towards using things like ECS or Fargate. Once you get into that sort of paradigm, ECS and Fargate are very comparable. They're offering Docker-based solutions there, image management, and think about the role that the registry plays in being able to find images and use them in your workloads. Also, consider the way that step functions can pass job information in and out of these different container worlds. Step functions gives us a way to provide a framework to go through and produce specific types of results with checks and balances along the way. I want these 5 things to happen in exactly this order, and I want validation along the way. That's going to be a great fit. A lot of that is kind of like classic workflowing. So we're thinking about common patterns, things we saw in the associate world, but we're adding all these different layers and facets on top of them. So final thing to kind of remember there is that Fargate is by far one of the most efficient container ones there because you're not having to manage the underlying systems. That means you don't have to worry about the number of actual server nodes running out there. You can just think about your container levels that you want to use. With ECS, you have a lot more control over the purchasing of those systems, but you also have to manage and think about the network locations that are a part of it. So remember that we're talking about the difference between control and responsibility. We want to give as much responsibility to AWS as possible while maintaining the right levels of control over the right types of details. Continuing on, I think another one that I always try to bring up here as well is the principle of Webscale architectures. Previously, this meant using things like content distribution networks. This meant using things like load balancers and understanding how that affects our model, and also making sure that we're tiering and creating the right levels of isolation on top of that. Well, on the pro exam, they're going to expect you to go even farther and understand some of the minutia between why we pick network load balancers, application load balancers, and then how to pair them up with things like direct registration, auto-scaling groups, target groups, and of course, thinking about how you're going to do image management and patch management and update management for those systems as well. So a lot of additional angles to consider on top of it. Remember, friends, network load balancer in particular, they talk about it very loosely in associate games, but in this new pro one, in the later pro ones here, they're thinking a lot more about knowing why that is a unique one and some of the key provisioning differences between it. Remember, the network load balancer has a couple of unique ways of allowing you to really kind of transparently interact with the nodes that are balanced in the background. And so this means that at that pass-through level, you're not configuring security groups on the network load balancers, and you're also considering the visibility of the client IP to the end nodes. A lot of network load balancer scenarios are about being able to let the client be as close to talking to the nodes directly themselves. So it's like providing abstraction without abstraction, which is a fun concept. Okay. On top of that, on the pro one, we're thinking, how does the web application firewall complement all of these services? So if you're not familiar with WAF and the levels that it can be implemented at, and some of the logic around how those rules work, definitely need to bone up on that. It's going to be a big part of this exam. And of course, keeping in mind that WAF is only one part of the security puzzle. We still need to know how it works with NACLs. We still need to know how it complements security groups and other types of endpoint security that you might have running in your VPCs or on the nodes that are actually handling that traffic. Okay, continuing on, another big pattern that we saw in here was migration scenarios. So you're going to be saying, we want to move to RDS, we want to move to EBS, we want to move to the Elastic File System, we want to move to FSX, or we have all this data that we need to move over, and we're concerned about the transition opportunities and how that timing is going to work. So here, you're thinking about what are the fastest ways to move certain amounts of data. Okay, so do we want to transfer it over the internet? Do we want to transfer it over Direct Connect? Do we want to put it on one of the Snowball import-export devices and ship it there physically? And remembering that often in a migration scenario, there are kind of three different big facets. You're thinking about the speed, and it's not always about how fast, but rather about what sort of time windows you have. You know that an application is allowed to be unavailable over the weekend. So that gives you a window to operate within. How quickly can you move things to meet that objective? Or recognizing that some applications have more critical parts of their infrastructure and less critical parts. Identifying how to best migrate the two together using things like the database migration service, using some of the image migration service, server migration service from AWS, and how those timelines are going to work, moving from VMware and moving from a Hyper-V environment, moving from a Xen environment, and how to get those VMs repurposed and working over in AWS. So a lot of additional pieces there around the migration activities itself. Along those lines, this digs us into probably one of the other big topics in here, and that is advanced networking concepts. So we definitely need to understand the difference between Direct Connect, Cloud Hub, site-to-site VPNs, understanding how global acceleration works, and using the AWS backbone network. There's going to be a lot of questions around data transfer between locations in the US, between regions across the world. And it's up to us as solutions architects to know the differences between them, the payload implications and some of the client implications, and of course, security and pathing. Whose ISP are you using? Are you using AWS's backbone? Are you using your own ISP? And of course, keeping in mind that you're also talking about durability and availability concerns there as well. So really pulling things together. If you're not comfortable with some of the BGP dynamic concepts there, definitely encourage you to understand how that works with VPN and Direct Connect and other sorts of pathing control options. Very important models that you're going to see picking up there as well. So let me make sure I put on here networking, very important one. Along those lines as well, keep in mind that you're also considering diverse VPN solutions. A lot of them aren't built around just site-to-site VPN for AWS. Some of them are built around using concentrators and provisioning other sorts of Cisco or Juniper devices that might run in your network to help provide access to remote systems. And finally, kind of trying to pull this together, I'm looking over my notes here real quick. Yeah, we talked about data transfer. Yeah, okay. Before we move on from networking, definitely understand virtual routed interfaces and virtual internal or external interfaces, how those work to provide access into AWS or access through Direct Connect out to internet-based resources. Again, a lot of interesting advanced networking parts here. It'll be interesting to see in the years ahead whether or not all that stays in the Pro or if they just move it over into the networking world. Okay, cool. Continuing on down, let's see a couple other pieces. Okay, updates and deployment options here. So this is kind of a DevOps piece. It's kind of the developer world parts, but understanding how we're going to roll out patches to groups of servers, whether that be with Systems Manager or whether it be using some sort of an agent deployment like Elastic Beanstalk, or whether we're using something like OpsWorks. And then considering too, how those deployment and update mechanisms pair up with DevOps CI/CD style systems. So code deploy, code build, knowing how those pieces fit together, code pipeline, helping you manage those life cycles through, and understanding some of the transition implications that happens in the background. Are we talking about service affecting? How gracefully can we perform it? The difference between rolling updates and blue-green updates or red-black, where you're actually doing a hard cutover. And of course, how services like load balancers and Route 53 can help augment that. Finally, getting down to the end here, I do want to kind of mention DNS. When we think about how DNS fits in, you want to know World Wide Web, like global DNS, and then also VPC level DNS, and how that affects things like Active Directory integrated DNS as well. Because keep in mind, for a lot of Windows-based domains, DNS is crucial in being able to make Route 53 and some of the resolver concepts work there, as well as being able to make sure that Active Directory is provisioned properly for authentication in AWS or with hybrid scenarios. Another big facet that's coming here. So at this point, you're probably like, stop, Bart, it's too much, it's too much. And I understand, friends, I've been doing this for years. And so I think that the Solutions Architect Pro in the end really does give you a great chance to kind of evaluate just how much linguistic functional jargon you can spin out there and how much you can quickly process and pull out the important patterns that they're trying to lay out in these questions. A lot of times I couldn't even read the entire thing all the way through. I had to kind of go through and just pick out, okay, they said Active Directory, they said DNS over here, and they're talking about name resolution, and here they're talking about how that fits with an identity pool. Okay, and then you're looking for the quick solution at the end, how that might work. And again, there's a whole bunch of answers that might be really long. So give yourself plenty of time to kind of prepare for this and get used to reading those big, long questions. You might try printing out the practice questions, circling some of the content that's in there that you think is a key part of the question, and then circling things in the answers, because doing that for practice will help you identify when it's actually game time to do it on the exam. Okay, so friends, just kind of wrapping this all up here. Remember that everything that you saw in the associate exam is going to come back on the pro exam. A lot of times it's pulling together multiple different facets, needing to know EC2 pricing, plus the right RDS option, plus the right volume selection, plus the right IP addressing piece, all within one question. So if you're not feeling comfortable with the core associate things, you definitely need to go back, and that's where I was trying to give you some of those study tips. Beyond that, if you jump out onto AWS and you give a Google, take a look at the exam guide. They do give you a good breakdown of the domains of understanding there. The sample questions that they provide are a great resource. And I always encourage people to check out AWS.training. That is the site that you'll go to register for your exams. It's also where you can go and look at their free training material that they provide. And in there is an exam prep course that they offer. Now, I want you to check out that material because it's stuff that I use to prepare my own content. And so if you're also looking for a chance to go and sign up for a great place where you can learn about networking, software development, project management, cloud computing, and all the other wonderful facets of IT, come check me out at CBT Nuggets, because that's where I'm putting my AWS courses together. And remember that I take these exams regularly. I go out there and I look at them with these things in mind, and I try to prepare that content so that you know where to go as an associate, where to go as a pro, and then of course, where to go with some of the specialty exams as well. So I hope that all this helps you out, gets you prepared. Remember to take breaks, rest up, stay excited about it. We'll see you in the cloud.